So here's the deal. Just finished up at Fort Loudon Tellico Lakes, the Tennessee River over in Knoxville, Tennessee. First of all, it was a really extremely tough week over there. Some of the challenges that we faced was, it was end of February, obviously. The weather was still cold. Practice was real weird, like we had a good rainstorm come through. The fishing was brutal to say the least, but normally on a fishery like that, there's always a way to kind of figure out what's going on and get some bites. And the way that I fish, my style of fishing this time of year is I try to find an area of the lake that I can get bites and that I'm comfortable in, and I can just kind of run around in one area and fish the whole tournament. And usually that pays off. I mean, more times than not, I'll come away with a good finish doing it that way. This week, however, was a little different. One thing that I was doing was I fished one day of practice, and I kind of stayed over in Fort Loudon where a lot of guys had caught them in the Classic a couple years ago. The water was a little more stained over there, so it just looked more inviting to the eye. First of all, the Tennessee River, that part of it, Fort Loudon Tellico, it has a lot of river characteristics, but it also has a lot of boat docks, wooden pole boat docks, a lot of muddy creeks that feed in, a lot of bridges, a lot of riprap. There's a lot of things in that lake, in both of those lakes, that suit me well in my style of fishing and what I like to do. But that first day of practice I spent over in Fort Loudon, and I had literally one bite, and that bite came offshore. It wasn't even on the bank around those, what I would call pre-spawn areas where those fish should be moving back in. And I tell you what, that first day I struggled bad enough that I thought, you know, I know it's a long run, but I'm gonna go over to Tellico and I'm gonna go way up the river, and I'm gonna try some of those same things that work on Fort Loudon, but on Tellico, and try to get away from some of the crowd. And wouldn't you know it, I go up there, and at this point I'm like 65 to 70 miles away from takeoff, being as that we're taking off in Knoxville. So I went up there, practiced, caught a few keepers, but I had a lot more bites. And I knew for some reason that it wasn't necessarily that I was going to catch more keepers, but I knew I was going to get a lot more bites over there. And I just felt more comfortable knowing that I was getting bites steadily to give me a chance at a solid finish. And so the third day of practice, I go back to Fort Loudon and fish closer to Knoxville, closer to takeoff. And I just didn't get the bites over there again on day 3 of practice that I felt like I needed to have a good tournament fishing that way. And I knew a lot of guys were going to catch them in Fort Loudon because that's how it was in the Classic. Those fish live there. That is a better, what I would call a largemouth lake. But the X factor this week was smallmouth. And you know, I didn't spend a whole lot of time fishing for smallmouth. I tried some areas, I graphed some places that looked like they should be good, but wasn't able to catch those fish, wasn't able to get the smallmouth bites, the 18-inch bites. He caught some small ones, but nothing big enough to make that 18-inch minimum. So one thing that I did that I never do was, when the tournament started, I was already kind of not beat, but I already kind of had felt like I knew I had to make a 70-mile run one way to have confidence I was going to catch fish. And that's just not me. That's not how I fish. But at the same time, I'm happy that I did that because it got me out of my comfort zone. It got me doing something that I was burning 52 gallons of gas a day running there and back. But day 1 of the tournament, I got up there and there was more guys than I thought, for one. And I just didn't make the right shuffles. And what I mean by that is you have to kind of have a rhythm, a pattern to the way you're fishing your day. And a lot of it's timing, things like that. But I found this area up there, and it was kind of stained water. The fish, I was getting more bites. And so I went up there, and the first day I just didn't get the keeper bites, man. I had quite a few bites. I had a lot of bites that were close. I caught several 13 3/4 to 13 7/8 fish, but just couldn't make them make that minimum limit of 14 inches. And I wasn't going to catch any smallmouth up there. That was just strictly a largemouth deal. But I only came away with 3 keepers, and for me it was kind of I thought I would be okay, and I was coming back to weigh in. I weighed in. I was, only a pound or so out of the top 50 cut, which was surprising, but at the same time, the fishing had been so tough that I figured it would be okay. But day 2, I went out there and went to the same areas because I didn't have anything else to go off of from practice, and I knew that if I could just slow down and work those areas over, that I could probably get some keeper bites. And to mention, there was a couple guys in that area that actually caught limits of fish, so I knew there was more fish there than I had caught. But I just wanted to kind of go over a couple of the baits and styles of fishing that I was doing to get the bites that I got, and kind of walk through some of the things in the mental side of it that I feel like I missed, things that I would change up, do a little bit different. And so get right to it. That place is known for red crankbaits. It's a place that I think if you watch tournaments past there, I've been there a couple times myself in the past, and it's always been a red crankbait type deal. I threw one a lot, didn't get a lot of bites on it, but it felt right. The banks looked right for it. It's that pre-spawn time of the year where they really like red and orange, have stained water. Everything lined up good for a red crankbait. This one's a Bomber 4A, and you can tell it's just a really good red and orange crawl pattern. Runs 4 to 6 feet deep depending on what size line you're throwing. I was throwing these on 10 and 12 pound Seagar and Vizex fluorocarbon. This is another one of the new TAC 40 rods from H2O Express. This is the 7-1 crankbait rod. It's a really good rod for throwing small crankbaits on. To me, this bait here, and I switched up a lot. I mean, it was a week where I couldn't throw one crankbait and feel like I was on the right deal with that one bait. So this one and a lot of other crankbaits came into play. It was just a really weird week with the water so cold. I tried to change up as much as I could to keep getting bites, but that was one of the baits I was throwing. One thing that I realized in practice was those fish weren't necessarily feeding just on crawfish. The water was really cold. It was in the 40s. That first morning of practice, it was in the low 40s, and it got up into the mid 40s throughout practice. Tournament, it kind of got up into the high 40s, but it stayed cold. One thing I noticed was there was a lot of shad dying off in the backs of those creeks, those places. The shad were up shallow and flipping around, and they do that when the water gets real cold. So I went to this one here is the one that I opted to throw. It's a War Eagle. It's cold slaw color, and I trimmed off some of the skirt and put on a little Yum Pulse swim bait. It's got a gold Indiana blade. I put that on there just to give it a little bit extra thump. But just a good shad imitator that works well in cold water. I personally feel like a lot of those fish were hanging around logs, laydowns, and just on those little bit steeper banks in the backs of those pockets, like they do any time of the year or any time of the pre-spawn on any lake. They'll go to those bridges, those riprap banks, those rocky banks, anywhere where they can congregate up and feed. And that was just another bait that I threw a lot, caught a few fish on. But something to me that I really felt like was a necessity was after day 1 was being able to catch a limit. And throwing a vibrating jig, to me, was the number 1 most important thing for day 2. I knew that some fish had been caught on it, talking to Micah, talking to a few of the other anglers, seeing what they had when we were sitting there visiting before takeoff. And I kind of felt like I had missed the whole shad thing. I kind of had crankbaits, jigs, things like that in my mind too much, and all reds and greens and browns. And I think as an angler, sometimes we get caught up in I don't want to call it dock talk, because it's not dock talk. It's more of history of what was going on a certain lake. And I just did not catch up and catch into the fact that, hey, it's pre-spawn. Yes, those fish are feeding on red baits. Yes, you can catch them on red all times of January, February, March. but I was too keyed in on that. And that second day, I ended up tying on a vibrating jig. This is the Booyah Melee, 3/8 ounce, just white with a white trailer. I was throwing the Young Pulse and also a fork tail trailer on there, just depending on where I was throwing it and what I wanted to do with it. But again, this is the same rod, 7-1 crankbait rod. It is a perfect vibrating jig rod. Throwing on a 6:6 to 1 gear ratio reel. I was moving it real slow. This is 15-pound Seaguar and Vizex. That's usually what I go to. And I was throwing it on 15 instead of 17 because I wanted that bait to stay down. And I felt like those fish weren't really up there right on the bank in some of those areas wanting to eat it as soon as you hit the water with it. So I wanted the bait to stay down, kind of draw those fish off those steeper banks and off those riprap banks and things like that. But I feel like these baits and throwing the reds kind of got in the way of what was actually going on there. For one, hats off to Jeff Gustafson for winning his first Elite Series tournament. It's a great triumph when you win one of those blue trophies, and I can't wait to do it again. But my hat's off to him for figuring it out. And he caught those fish out deeper, totally something different that I really didn't give a whole lot of time to. Looking back, I wish I would have looked a little more for those smallmouth offshore. But you know, I came away with a 54th, I think, place finish, just 6-8 ounces from the top 50. And for me, you know, people are like, well, man, you know, you'll get them next time, you'll do good, you'll do better, whatever. But for me, I didn't do bad. I look at success a little bit different than some guys. For me, if I go out in an Elite Series tournament and make a top 50, that's where the checks get bigger, that's where everything changes. It gives you an extra day of fishing. For me, that's success. So I was really only one bite away from having what I consider a successful tournament. So yes, it was disappointing. Yes, I feel like I should have done a few things different. One being I should have looked at the shad pattern stuff a lot more. So never, keep that in mind. Never just get in your head that only one thing's gonna work, because there's always other options that are gonna work. I wished I'd have thrown shad pattern stuff a little bit more. I wished I would have looked around a little bit more up towards Knoxville. That was an area that was not really talked about. There wasn't really a whole lot of history on that, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time up there within 20 miles of takeoff. Because when you take off from Knoxville, you have to run way down the lake, even just to get down to what usually is the better part of Fort Loudon. And for me, I was running all the way through Fort Loudon, up to Tellico, and all the way to the north end of Tellico. So there was a lot of things that I took away from this week. And for me, as a competitor that I am always looking for a way to get better, looking for things that I can take away. Not that you sit and dwell on those tournaments where you don't have the finishes you want, but I want to be able to take away things that I can take to the next event. And for me this week, I got caught up too much into one thing, thinking that I had to throw red to get bit. I let practice dictate my mindset. And what I mean by that is I didn't have very many bites in practice. And instead of knowing that those fish are in those areas, they're going to be coming to those areas and fishing my strengths, I kind of started the tournament off with if I can just get a couple bites, I'll be happy. If I can just get a couple bites, I'll do okay. And that's never the right mindset. You should always go into it with, what's it going to take to win this event? And that's 5 keepers no matter where we go. You've got to catch a limit every day. And I just failed to do that on day one. That cost me big time. But I came away with a lot of new learning experiences. Again, I made a 70-mile run each day, so I feel good about getting out of my comfort zone and doing that. Hopefully our next tournament's on Pickwick, another Tennessee River impoundment, but it's going to be a little further along into March, a little bit further along into that pre-spawn time of year. I've got a lot of history on that lake. I've done well there, done bad there, but I know what things that I did wrong here this week, and I think I can change up and do a few things, find a few more baits that stick with those things that I have confidence in. And it never seems to amaze me how much more those bad tournaments fuel the fire and the desire to want to win and to compete at the highest level. And I can tell you right now, guys, I'm hungry. I want another blue trophy. I want to walk away from those tournaments, if not winning top 10s. I mean, I want to be one of those guys that when people see you, they fear you and they know that you're gonna do things. And for me, it's hard to come away knowing that I was close to dialing things in. A lot of those areas that guys caught them, I fished through those areas. I idled through those areas looking for those fish, never found them. That's disappointing when you have the best equipment on the market, the best things, you have everything at your disposal, and you let your equipment down. You let your stuff down and don't do your job, and that's frustrating. And so that's the recap for the week. I feel like I learned a lot. I feel like I took away a lot from it. I'm hungry. I want to win even more, and hopefully you can learn a little bit from what I did this week at Fort Loudon and Tellico and apply it to your tournament fishing or just your fun fishing. And don't make the same mistakes I did. Have an open mind. Yes, stick to your strengths, but have an open mind on colors, things of that nature. Don't get caught up doing one thing. Hope you learned a lot from this video, and I appreciate all the support, guys. Hey, and also be watching for the next Days of an Elite tournament for Fort Loudon Tellico Lakes on the Tennessee River. That'll be coming out here real short. Be sure and subscribe and share those videos. Share it with your friends. We need to get the followers up. We're going to be adding a lot of content. We're going to try to be putting out a video a week. So make sure you're paying attention and hit that notification button so that'll show up on your phone when we put a new video up. Appreciate the support.